Hello and welcome to the third part of our simple inventory system tutorials. In this video, we're going to be learning how to move items around in our inventory UI. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to want to do is come over to our item slots, the prefab. We're going to go inside the prefab, and on the FSM for this, in the initialized state, we're going to want to put an action that we're going to grab off the ecosystem. So if you don't have the ecosystem already, make sure you download it. If you don't know how to download it, we have a video about how to get you all set up with the ecosystem. There's a link in the description. Okay, so I'm going to open it up with Alt-E, and I'm going to search child transform. And the action that we want is this get transform sibling index. Okay, this green one right here. Now this is green because I already have it. So if I search over here, transform sibling index, get transform sibling index. See, I already have it, but if you don't already have it, make sure you get it. You can, all these actions on the ecosystem have a little button that says get, so you just click on that and then you wait for it to load. It'll say Unity is compiling down here, so just wait for that to finish. And then you'll know you have it when you can come over to your action browser and type it in and find it there. Okay, so once you have that, we're gonna drop it in our initialization state. So what this action does is it looks at the parent game object that it's under, and then it looks at all its siblings that share that same parent, and it asks itself what its index is descending top to bottom. The one all the way at the top is 0, the next one is 1, etc., etc. So it's just like an array, except it's looking for the index in its personal hierarchy. Okay, so we're getting the transform sibling index from this game object, and we want to store it as a new variable, item slot underscore index. And just so we can see how this is working, I'm going to come over to variables, and I'm going to say that this is an output variable. Okay, that way it populates over here in our inspector. So if I save this and head back out to the scene and I press play, so if I hit I so that everything turns on, if I select this item slot, the first one, see that it's item slot index 0. If I select the second one, index 1. If I select the last one, which has a little 11 next to it, its item slot index is 11. Okay, so that's working out perfectly. Okay, so the reason we want the indexes of all these item slots, right? So all these item slots are over here, right? So the first one is this one, second one is that one, etc., etc. The last one is right here. We want the index of all of these to match the index of the player's inventory array. So if you had 5 items in here, they should all match this. So when we move things around in the UI, we'll make it so that it gets updated over here, so the indexes matches over here. Okay, so I'm gonna change this back to 0. I'm gonna go inside this item slot. Okay, so we're inside the prefab, and we're gonna make it so that when you click on it, that means you've picked it up. Some inventory systems use a click and drag system, but the one we're gonna be programming right now, for simplicity's sake, is click to pick up and then click again to place it, kind of like Minecraft. Okay, so I'm gonna right click over here, add global transition, UI events, UI pointer down. Okay, I'm gonna add another global transition, UI events, UI pointer enter. Add another one, global transition, UI events, UI pointer exit. Okay, now we're just gonna save this, come back out here, select an item slot, and we're gonna play this so you can see how these all work with the UI system. Now, if we play this right now, moving around the mouse is just gonna move around the look, and we're not really gonna be able to interact with these items. So what we need to make sure that we're doing is that when the inventory display opens up, that we're also disabling the player's controls. So to do that really quick, what I'm gonna do is drag and drop our player in here, and we're gonna do a playmaker FSM, state machine, enable FSM, and this will give us the option to disable the FSMs on our player game object. Now our player game object, we didn't name these, so player move one, we'll call this one move, player look, this will be look, and this one we'll call interact, okay, and inventory. Just make sure they all have unique names. So back here, disable FSM, we could change this to turn off look. Okay, we're gonna disable it, so that's unchecked. We'll let it reset on exit. I'm gonna copy and paste this action. We're gonna turn off move, and I'm gonna copy paste this. We're gonna turn off interact. So all these get deactivated but they'll get reactivated once we go back to this state. Okay, that's why they have the reset on exits down here. Now, while we're here, what we're going to want to do is set the mouse cursor, because currently our player look sets the mouse cursor to be invisible and it locks it in the middle of the frame. So after we turn all those things off, we're going to unhide the cursor and unlock the cursor. And I'm actually, just for good measure, going to go to our inventory over here and just put this in to hide and lock it when our inventory is closed. All right, so with this cursor stuff all set up and these enable FSMs all set up, we'll be able to open the menu and actually click around on things without our character moving their head around, and we'll actually be able to use the mouse as opposed to it being locked. So if I press play, all right, so if we click in our game screen here, you can see our mouse disappears, and if I move the mouse around, it's only moving our look. But once I hit the I key, we get our cursor back, and we're not looking around anymore. Okay, so if I select this first item slot, you can see that when I hover my mouse over it, it goes to pointer enter, and when I exit, it goes to pointer exit. So it only fires that off once that thing happens. So when I exit, it fires it off the one time. When I enter it, it fires it off the one time. Okay, now if I click it, it's using pointer down. So that's if my pointer goes down. So my mouse button isn't being let go when I do this right now. You can hear it. So this is what me clicking and letting go of the button sounds like. Right? There's click, click. But just clicking down is what fires it. That's what a UI pointer down is, as opposed to the global transition for UI events, which is UI pointer click, which would be letting go. Also UI pointer up, which just looks for the point where it's going up. So it's a similar concept as your get key and get button and all those other input actions when they're looking for up or down or true or false and all that kind of stuff. So we're just looking for the one with pointer down. So we're looking good here. And now you can see if I select any one of these, that's number 7, that's this one right here. If I click in the screen, this works too. Okay. If it looks like it's not working for you, you might have clicked out of the game screen. So like right now, if I try to do this, it looks like nothing's happening. But that's because I clicked on one of these panels right now over here. So I need to click back in the game screen for Unity to realize that we mean to be playing over here. Okay, so that all works. Now, with that working, if I go into the prefab, on UI pointer enter, that basically means our mouse is over that item slot. We want to tell our system which item it's hovering over. And then on exit, we want to clear that information of what item it's hovering over. And with these little gaps in between, that means that when we're hovering over this one, it'll be saying you're hovering over the first one, but the moment it leaves, it says you're hovering over nothing, and then the moment your cursor enters anything else, it says now you're hovering over that one. And then pointer down could be used to say commit to that information. So the first thing that we should set up is to make it so that whenever you click on something, the image of it goes away and instead looks like you're holding it, so it floats around with your cursor. Okay, so back here in the scene, I'm going to minimize this stuff. Okay, so under our canvas, I'm going to right click, go to UI, image. We're going to call this our inventory cursor. Okay, so this cursor will display what we've picked up. The first thing that we're going to want to do is make it follow around the mouse. So I'm going to right click, add an FSM, and we're going to call this follow cursor. Okay, so what we're going to want is a get mouse position action. Get mouse position is available on the ecosystem. So if you just search mouse position, it's this one right here, get mouse position. Okay, so after you get mouse position, it's going to store that in a new variable. It's a vector 3, so we're going to say our mouse position underscore v3. You don't want to normalize it, but you do want to run every frame. And then we're going to do a get vector 3 xyz. Okay, so we're just going to pull the x and y values from our mouse position. So we'll call this mouse x, and this one will be mouse y. This will be running every frame. And then we're going to be using a set position 2D to set the position of this inventory cursor using our mouse X, mouse Y, and in world space running every frame. Okay, so let's run that really quick, make sure it works. Okay, looks good. Even when The inventory isn't open, so I'm gonna hit I. Okay, there we go. Looks good. Okay, so what we could do is just make sure that the inventory cursor is off by default. And when we open our inventory, we'll just drag and drop this inventory cursor game object into our actions, do game object, activate, and I don't want it to be recursive, but it will activate. And then we'll have it reset on exit, so it goes away when we close this. Okay, so let's see, press play. All right, so looking around, can't see our mouse. Hit I, now we can, and the thing is following our mouse. Hit I to close, back to this, can't see our mouse. Looks good. All right, next. What we're gonna do is have our item slots tell the cursor which item slot it's currently over. So if we go to the item slot and we do the UI pointer enter, that means our cursor is currently over it, we could do a set FSM game object. And we're going to be specifying a new variable that we'll call our inventory cursor. Make sure I spelled that right. Okay. And the FSM name, we'll call this item slot nav. And the variable name will be item slot underscore currently over. Okay, so we haven't set up this FSM yet, and of course, not the variable because the FSM doesn't even exist, but we'll set that up in just a moment. So we're going to be setting that value with a new variable called this item slot. Okay, now in a init, we can do a get owner that will be this item slot. Okay, so what we could do is come over to variables, and on inventory cursor, let's just make that an input. So we could drag and drop something in here. Okay, so let's just remember this. I'm going to copy this text and I'll remember item slot nav. This information is going to go on our inventory cursor. So I'm going to head back out here and I'm going to go to the inventory cursor, add a new component. Okay, and I called it item slot nav. I'm going to hit edit, and in here, I want to make a new game object variable. I'm going to paste that name in, item slot currently over. Okay, so now it has the value that we're going to be setting. And I'm going to go ahead and select all these item slots except for the first one, and I'm going to delete it. So that way I could select the first one, and this inventory cursor input, I could drag and drop our inventory cursor in there. And now I could just select this and duplicate it a bunch of times to fill this out. It's not too big of a hassle when you are only making a couple changes here and there like that. With our inventory cursor receiving that item slot currently over, what it can do is get FSM game object from the item slot it's currently over. And actually, let's just drag one of these in here so we can get these names right. The FSM is going to be item slot, and the variable name is going to be item object. And we're going to store that. We're going to copy it. New variable locally, name the same thing. Okay, so I'm going to change this back to item slot currently over. This is going to be running every frame. It's going to be getting which object is actually in the slot that we're currently over. So I'm going to right click on this edit variable. I'm going to make it an output. And that way we should be able to see over here if we're hovering over the right thing. So let's save that and let's give it a go. Let's try it out. So if I add that and that and that and open the inventory, we should see over here when my mouse hovers over it, grass. This is kind of working, but not really. And my suspicion is that on our inventory cursor, this image is a raycast target. So our mouse is getting in the way. So I'm going to deselect this raycast target. And now you'll see that it's very responsive. I'm over grass, I'm over dirt, I'm over stone. So it's updating as we expected. Great. So I'm going to stop playing and I'm going to come over to this raycast target. I'm going to deselect it. All right, we don't want this image of that little block that's following our cursor that's getting in the way of our cursor and it. You can kind of think of it in 3 dimensions that way. It's on top of that object. So by turning off the raycast target, our mouse is performing its raycast through the little cursor square and is only reaching the item slots now. Okay, so that doesn't get in our way. Great, so that's working, which means that we can now also get FSM int. And we can get specify game object. I'm going to drop this in so we get it for free. Item slot and item slot index. Okay, so I'm going to change this back to the variable. And we're going to copy that and store it as a new variable locally. It's the same name. It's running every frame. And so now we even have the index of the slot that we're currently over. In this way, when we pick things up and move them around, we could send that information to the inventory that it came from, so it always matches. So how do we do that? What we're going to do is we're going to set up different states here in our cursor's item slot nav FSM. So we're going to go to events, and we're going to make some new events. We're going to call these ones cursors. Okay, so cursor space / space, nothing held. Okay, it's a global event. And we're going to make a cursor space / space holding. It's also going to be global. And then we're going to make a cursor space / space place. And it's also global. So we'll add those over here by selecting our first state and just saying global transition cursor nothing held, right? That's what this one is. And on either sides of this, we could do global transition cursor holding and global transition cursor place. Okay, so this is where we're nothing held, nothing, holding, and place. So over here in item slots, let's go inside the prefab. When we select UI pointer down, when we click this item slot, we can send an event to the inventory cursor. And it's the item slot nav FSM. And we're going to send the event, global events, cursor holding. So that way, when you click on something, if I save this, go back out here, go to our cursor holding, we can do a get FSM sprite or get FSM object, getting it from the item object. And actually, let's make sure we get this right. Item slot, item sprite, okay, and that's the item object. And we're gonna make a new variable. I think we could just do sprite. We can go like that, paste that in, and over here, sprite. So we use that to then UI image set sprite, and we're gonna be setting that on the owner here as the item sprite. So it's getting the item that we just clicked and setting it as the cursor. Let's try that out. Okay, so I'm going to grab that and that and that, open up the inventory. So right now we just have a white block, but if I click on this green one, now I can see I have a green one. If I click on the brown one, well, it doesn't overwrite it because you'll see that we're still in holding, and this is not where it updates it. But that's okay, we don't want it to update here. So it's just whichever one you click like that. So if I close it and reopen it, you can see it update correctly. Okay. So next thing is that we'll just have it so when the item slot gets clicked, it's also clearing its image sprite, or it's making something invisible. We could try something like a UI graphic set color and setting it with an alpha of 0 to make it transparent. So let's try that out really quick. Okay, so saving this and back out in the scene, let's play it. Okay, so I'm gonna grab that and that and that, open it up. If I grab the dirt, there. See, it's invisible now, so it looks like it's not there, and it looks like we're holding it instead. Okay, so that's a good start. Now what we want is that when we're holding it, we want to remove it from that inventory array, because when you've clicked and held it, it's kind of like you've pulled it out. Let's go split up some more of that logic in our item slots. Going over to the item slot, let's come over to the pointer down. Now what we want here is something to delineate an empty slot versus an occupied slot when we do click on it. Okay, so what we could do here is just take these two actions. I'm selecting the first one, holding shift and selecting the second one. I'm just gonna click and drag these out into their own state. Okay, so now they exist over here in state 4. Over here in UI pointer down, what we're gonna put in is a game object is null action. And this is gonna be checking our item object, that's the object that this item slot carries, and it's gonna be checking if it's null or not. That means, is there actually an object there, or is this an empty value? So if it is null, we're gonna make a new event. We're just gonna call it is null. Okay, we'll send that transition and make another event is not null. Okay, and we'll add that as well. So is null means it's empty. So we'll send off over here. But if it's not null, that means it has something, then we'll send off over here. Okay, that means we've grabbed something. Okay, so this is grab, and this is holding. Okay, so when we come here, what we want to do is check whether or not the cursor is currently holding something. And if it is, then it will place the object. But if it's not, then this is just sort of a click empty. Okay, nothing happens there. So the way we're going to check that is by doing a get FSM bool, and we're going to be getting the bool from our inventory cursor, and it's going to be in our item slot nav. Okay, and the variable, we'll go over there and create it in just a second, but the variable will be called is holding. Okay, I'm going to copy that text, and I'm going to store it locally here as well. And then we're going to do a bool test, and we're going to be checking is holding. If it's true, send the event true. That means we place something. But if we're not holding something, we'll be sending false, where we just kind of click an empty space. Okay, so save that, head back over to our cursor, and in nothing held, we're going to put a set bool value. I'm going to put it up here at the top, and we're going to make a new variable. I'm going to paste that is holding text in, so it's spelled exactly the same way, and the bool value is going to be set to false, so we could just leave that as is. Then I'm going to copy this action, and I'm going to place it in here, and I'm going to move it up to the top, except this time we're going to be setting it to true, because in this cursor holding state, we are holding something. And then in cursor place, we could place that in as well. Okay, set to false. Let's hop over to our item slots, and let's just make sure that this logic checks out. Let's just name this state occupied slot, question mark. Clicking empty doesn't really do anything, but place means that we're going to want to get FSM game object from our inventory cursor, and that'll be our item slot nav, and it'll be the item obj. And then we're storing it locally here in our item obj. And once we have it, we could place that stuff here. We could do this item slot populate. So over here, all this needs is to have the item obj set. It takes care of the rest itself. So we're getting from our cursor the item object that it's currently holding, and we're storing it as item obj. That's here locally, right? This is also the value that we use when we populate this item obj. So if I place, all I want is this item obj and a send event, and then we're just sending to ourself this item slot populate. Okay, so let's give this a test and let's see what happens. Okay, and I'm gonna grab this and this and this, open the inventory. So I grab our stone, I'm holding it, and I'm gonna try placing it here, and it places there. Okay, we still need to clear this cursor, but you can see that we successfully picked it up and put it right there. Let's try grabbing this one and placing it there. So right now, it looks like we just have infinite numbers of these, right? So we don't want that. Let's fix that up. What's happening is our inventory cursor needs to get updated. Once it has something placed, it clears everything that's inside of it, so it doesn't continue to hold that value. The way we could do this is by coming over to our item slots, and when we place something, we could do a send event to GameObject FSM, specify our inventory cursor. We're going to be sending to item slot nav, and the event we're sending is global events cursor place. Okay, that way, if I save this and head back over to our scene, go to our cursor, and in the place state, we can now set game object, our item obj, just set to nothing. So you could leave this empty, so it clears that out. And let's look through our other variables. We're setting is holding already. The item slot we're currently over gets updated here by this cursor nothing held state. So what we could do is make sure that we add a finish transition to this. That just goes back to this state. So once we do place, it comes back here and it keeps updating itself. Okay, but let's continue looking at our variables. The item slot index, that gets updated once we go back over here, so that's already taken care of. And the item sprite, that can also probably get taken care of over here, but what we'll do is just set object value, and we'll set our item sprite to none. The thing that you remember is that we set the alpha of our item slots to 0. So there needs to be a way that we ensure its alpha goes back up to make it visible. So in populate, we'll probably put that there. So if we go over to our grab, we could take this UI graphic set color, copy it, come over to populate, paste it in, except now if we select this, we could turn the alpha all the way up. Okay, so what we could do just to be safe is we could change this to none, and then change the alpha to full alpha, which if you come over here and you slide alpha all the way up, it's at 255, okay? That's what a full alpha is like. So we're gonna set this to 255 on populate, and then we're gonna come over here to grab, and we're gonna make this color value set to none, but we'll change this alpha down to 0. Okay, so that looks good. Let's see if that works. Saving this, heading back over to the scene, and let's press play. Okay, so we'll grab that and that and that, open up the inventory, grab green, place it back, or place it here. Okay, we're still holding this one. So if I Control Shift P to pause the game, and I come over to our inventory cursor, we never got the cursor place fire off. So we look at the item slots. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is where we placed it. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, item slot number 4. And you can see that, yeah, we did place it in. And if we come down here, the problem is that this item slot populate send event was sent before we could send the event to the cursor, right? So it's just an order of operations problem, because when we send this, that means it comes over here, and it never got a chance to fire off this last action. So it's a simple fix that we can come over into our prefab for and go right here and literally just put this one at the bottom. Okay, now if we come over and play this, grab it, grab it, grab it, open inventory, grab the green, place it right there. You can see that place is there, but okay, so if we pause it again, now we go to item slot number 4 and we went to place. It sends the event cursor place to the inventory cursor. So if I select that, it did get placed, but what we haven't done here is set the UI image. So I'm gonna stop this, and we'll go UI image set sprite. We can give it a try. Grab, 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 open, grab the green, place it here. So it does kind of work, right? It works, but the problem is that now we're holding a white square again. And if we're not holding anything, it should just be invisible. So what we could do is in place, we'll just have a UI graphic set color. And like this one, we're gonna change that to none, and the alpha will change to 0. And then we'll copy this action, and over in holding, we'll paste it up here at the top. We'll change it down here right before the image set sprite, and we'll change it to 255, which is the full alpha value. Okay, so let's see how that works. Let's hit play, grab, 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 open inventory, grab, place, and that looks good. Okay, now I can put that there, this there. I should be able to put this there, and put this there. So this isn't letting me place it in slots that I've already pulled it from. So if I put my mouse over this first one and click it, and then we could see that obviously it didn't work. If I press Control Shift P to pause it, I can come over and select my first item slot, and we could see that where it landed is in grab. So it thinks that there is actually an object still in here. And the reason for that is because when we grab it, it's just sending the event and updating this UI color, but it's never clearing the value that it originally had. So we could stop this, go into our prefab, and in grab, what you want is a set game object value. And we're just gonna be setting our item obj to nothing. Okay, so let's save this, head back out, press play, grab, 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 inventory, should grab that, place it here. Now we should be able to grab it and place it back. There we go. Okay, so we can move all these around, and we can even place them in places that were there before, and it's all looking pretty good. So the one thing that you might want to touch up here is the fact that there are these item slots being white and visible. Otherwise, it just kind of looks like you're placing around in a big invisible box, but it's kind of nice to actually have the squares like this to actually see what you're placing it on. If we stop this and we head over to our item slots, when you grab it, this is the one where you might want to set UI image sprite to nothing and not use this set color. Okay, so how does this play? Let's see if that reads a little bit better. And that way you could use your own custom graphics for each of the image slots. So grab, 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 open, there you go. And so now you can have a better idea of where you're placing things, right? Now the last thing that we want to set up here is a way to move the items around in the inventory array that they came from. So if we head to our item slot, let's take a look at this FSM. In grab, we'll have a send event that happens up here with our cursor send event. Except this one, we're going to be sending to a game object FSM. We're going to be specifying the game object. There's a new variable called inventory display. And this variable, we're going to edit, and we're making an input. That way we can specify which display this item slot belongs to. So for this one, what we're going to do one at a time here. I'm going to delete all these item slots again. Right, so we still have this one that has our inventory cursor in it, but we also want the player inventory display. Okay, so that's this one's, and then we could just go ahead and duplicate a bunch of these again like we did last time. So similarly, in our external inventory display, we would do the same thing, right? So for this one's item slots, if I go ahead and delete all these and I just grab this one, first of all, it needs its cursor, right? And its inventory display is the external inventory display. Okay, so I select that, duplicate that a bunch of times. All right, so that's all set up. These both are matching now. So if I go inside this item slot and the event that we want to send to our inventory display, we'll call it inventory display. We'll make that FSM. Okay, inventory display, that's the name of the FSM. And we're going to send the event, global events, inventory, remove item. So I already have that event from before, but go ahead and make it if you don't have it. And by the way, that's spelled all caps, inventory, space, slash, space, remove item. Okay, so that's the event that we're going to be using. Okay, but the item that we want to remove from there is a very specific item. We want to remove it from a specific index. So we're going to do a set FSM int. We're going to put that just above the send event, so it has an int to use once we send this event. We're going to be sending that to our inventory display. That's the FSM name, and the variable name will be item to remove underscore index. So that's what this variable will be. Now, which item is it? Well, what we could do is, since we're grabbing here, right, it's this item slot, we can use the item slot index. Okay, so I'm going to copy this item to remove index, save this, come back out to our scene, go to our player inventory display, right click, add global transition, inventory, remove item. Okay, now for you, it might also be in add global transition, custom events, inventory, remove item. Okay, so in here, what I want to do is array delete at. And the array that I want to delete from is inventory, and the index that I'm going to be using is a new variable. I'm going to paste that name in, item to remove index, right? Which will already be set by the item slot that just sent this event. Okay, so we'll call this remove item. This inventory, we should see it populate right now. I'm going to press play. We'll see it populate, but we'll see also that when I open up the UI for the inventory and remove stuff, that it should also reflect in there. So I press I, okay, you can see the inventory, right? It has our dirt, grass, and stone. If I click on grass, it gets removed. Now currently, if I place it back in, it does not get added back in. We need to add that add item. But so far, we're looking pretty good. Okay, so stop that. And we're gonna come over to our item slot. And when we do a place, we're gonna have the same logic here of set FSM and send event. So I'm actually gonna copy these two. I'm selecting the first one, holding shift, and selecting the second one. So I have the set FSM int and send event. Both of these are targeting our inventory display. I'm gonna copy them over here in place. I'm gonna select this comment as the first thing, so when I paste them in, they get placed up here at the top. Okay, except now it's gonna be item to add index, and we're gonna be using the same item slot index. The event that we're gonna be sending, instead of inventory remove item, it's gonna be global events inventory add item. Okay, and that's spelled all caps inventory space/space add item. I'm gonna copy this, go back to our scene, right click, add global transition, and it's not in there, so I go to custom events, inventory, add item. In here, we're doing an array set. Instead, I'm gonna drag this array set out into the canvas so it's its own little state. And the index I'm gonna set as a variable, and it's gonna be a new variable. I'm gonna paste in that name, item to add underscore index. And the array that we're adding it to is our inventory. That's all fine, right? But something we're missing here is the value that we're gonna need to add. So let's just make a new variable here, item to add, okay? I'm gonna copy that text, so that way, save this, we go back to our item slot. Over here in place, with this little batch here, we could also do a set FSM game object. Okay, so we're gonna send it with it as well. And we're gonna specify our inventory display, the variable name, I'm gonna paste in the item to add, and the value that we're setting is the item that's here in this slot, so this is going to be item obj. And we're gonna use this getFSM game object. We're just gonna right click and move to the top. So we get that before anything. And that way our inventory display, when we add something, it has the index at which we want to add it to, the object that we want to add, and then we send the event to tell it to do that. Okay, so item to add, I'm copying this, heading, and yes, I want to save it, and heading back over here. Okay, array set, that's all good. It'll do that. So using the array set action allows us to match the indexes of our inventory UI and of our inventory array. So in fact, we're even going to come over here and we're going to change this array delete at. We're going to deactivate it really quick, and we're going to use an array set over here as well. So we're going to change it to work off the same system that add item uses. The index that we're going to use is item to remove index. And we're just going to set it with nothing. Okay, it could just get set to nothing. So we can get rid of this delete at. And actually, we're not going to get too fancy here. We're just going to take this array set, we're going to remove it, and we're going to just drag and drop it here in this state. So it is the first thing that happens. Okay, so I'm just going to delete that state. And the way that we're going to ensure we always match the array size is by setting a limitation on how big the array can be on the character's inventory and on the inventories of a chest. Otherwise, you're going to need to design an additional feature which allows you to either flip through pages of the inventory if there's a dynamically growing amount of items, or have a scroll bar to scroll through additional ones, etc. But for this simple inventory, we're just going to have it set to have this 4x3. So everything that has inventory in this simple inventory system will just be limited to 12 items each. Just know that this setup will work with a dynamically growing and shrinking inventory size if you wanted to add those features on. You could still use the base of everything that you're learning here to then expand on if you wanted to. Okay, so we're just going to work with this. We're going to call this add item. We go over to our variables and go to our inventory. I'm just going to say it's 12. 12 items that we can have. That's how, because that's how many we have here. And then what that means is that I'm going to have to come over to our items, and it's going to send this event to the player, inventory add, right? So when it adds the player's inventory will, instead of just having an add, I'm going to turn this off. Instead, it'll be adding to the inventory is going to find the next available spot. So what we could do, kind of like in Minecraft, when you pick up an item, it goes to the first slot that isn't occupied. The way you could do this is by doing a array get next, and we're going to be cycling through our inventory. We'll have a loop event. We'll have a reset flag. We'll call it reset flag underscore inventory, and a finished event, which will just be a complete transition. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this original finish transition, and I'm going to move this loop event down. So the loop event is going to come down here, and it's going to do a game object is null check. It's going to check the items that we pull from this array. So this array, we're going to store the results in a new variable called next item, and we're also going to have its index. We're going to store that as a new variable called next item underscore index. Okay, so that's what we're checking for, our next item. And if it's null, then we'll go next. Okay, next will bring us down here to an array set. And we're going to be setting the inventory at the index, next item index, and the value that we want to set is our item to add. Okay, because that means that what it found here in the array was an empty slot. So it's going to cycle through this until it finds an empty slot. It gets the slot, checks if it's empty, and if it's not empty, we'll have an event send back. Okay, and it'll send back up here, and it'll try again, get the next one, come back here, is that space empty? And if it finally is, it goes down here and it adds the item that we wanted to add to the index that we found out that was empty. Okay, so once that's done, we can send down to here where it continues to set the invisibility and layer and kinematic stuff. Okay, now over here on complete, I'm just gonna send right here. So on this final state, what I'm going to do is just send off to some reset values where we'll do set bool value, reset flag, setting it to true, and we'll have a set game object, which will set the next item also to nothing. Okay, we'll just call this reset. And this one will be is null question mark, and this one is set inventory. Okay, so that all checks out. Complete. All right, looking good. So now this inventory system works with a set number of inventory slots. Okay, so it's fixed to a 12 slot system. So in variables, just make sure that this is also set to 12. Okay, let's take a look at our item slot, and I think everything's good to go. Does place, okay, empty, grab. Before we move on, let's just make sure that this inventory displays inventory is going to match what we see on screen with the UI. Okay, so we have grass, dirt, and stone, right? That's 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, 3. Or I guess technically it's 0, 1, 2, right? Now, if I click this stone and move it up 1, you can see that now we have grass, dirt, blank, stone. Same thing, grass, dirt, blank, stone. You can take this grass, move it second to last. Now you can see that there's nothing up front, but we have a second to last grass. So this is syncing, right? That's all good. Now we can do the finishing touch, which is to use this to set the player's inventory. Okay, so what we do is set FSM array. And we're going to do specify game object. Okay, and we're going to use our object with inventory. And since this is a template, we'll be able to change that between our player inventory display and the dynamically set inventory display. So over here, we already have player set on this one, right? That's looking good. We're going to set the FSM array in there of inventory and inventory. And we're going to set the value with inventory. Don't want to copy the values, but that's pretty much it. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it in here as well. So now what should happen is I should be able to select the player, and if we go down to their inventory and we monitor this, we should see this inventory updating with what we have. Okay, so I have the player inventory. Let me just scroll down so we're looking at all of it. Okay, so I'm going to grab that, that, and that. Okay, that's expected that we have grass, dirt, and stone. But now, if I move this stone down to the final spot, it gets set there. If I take our dirt and move it up ahead a spot, we can see that now our inventory UI is perfectly synced with our player's actual inventory array. Okay, so this is what we want. Okay, so let's stop that. And let's make sure that this works now with something like this chest. So I'm gonna just scooch this down. I'm gonna minimize this really quick. Minimize this. Okay, so we have our player inventory display and our external inventory display. So I'm just gonna delete the external inventory display right now. Okay, because this needs to get turned into a proper template. Right now it's just an FSM. So I'm gonna right click in here. We're gonna go save template. We're gonna call this simple inventory display. Yes, I wanna use it in here. That looks good to me. And now I'll duplicate it and I'll rename it to external inventory display. And we have all these item slots. And it's cool because when we duplicated it, Unity did a little favor for us and sort of kept the hierarchy in order. So the inventory display got updated to reflect what its parent inventory display was. So you'll see here that the value for an inventory display is external inventory display. And over here on our player inventory display, its item slots, it shows the player inventory display, right? See that? So they both reflect their respective inventory display. That's great. And they both have the inventory cursor. Okay, so that's all looking good. The item slots are set up and the actual inventory display FSMs, the player one, we have it set up to be the player, and that's right. And its item slot panel is the one underneath it, that's right. But the external one, the item slot panel is correct, but we do not want it to be the player. So we're actually going to delete that from the external inventory displays FSM. We want this to be dynamically set. So the way you could dynamically set something up, so we head over here in the template. First of all these notifications, not a big deal. You just come over here to the inputs. You can just select the type mismatch and hit delete. Okay, not a big deal because it'll still show up here in the inputs. Okay, so all that got cleared up. Great. So for inside here, on initialization, what we're going to do is put one little state in between here. And in here is player inventory question mark. And it's going to have a game object is null. And the game object it's checking is object with inventory. So if it is null, we'll say next. Okay, and that's going to send us over here really quick. And that basically means that we don't have the player game object in here, right? That's null. So that means that over here, we are external. And we'll set that up in just a second, but if it's not null, that means that this is the player's inventory. And we can just skip this, and it'll continue on as usual. But if it is external, then what we want to do is get FSM game object. And what we want to get is what the player's looking at. So we're going to make a new variable called player. And we'll set up this FSM on the player in just a moment, but the FSM will be called LookingAt. The variable name is object hit. And we're going to copy that and store it in a value. And we're using whatever the player is looking at to say that's our object with inventory. Okay, so that'll just send back down here. And in here, if the FSM is not found, inventory, that means that whatever the player is looking at doesn't have an inventory. So we shouldn't show anything. And we can just add this skip transition. Okay, so let's just move some of these down really quick. And skip will just say not inventory. Okay, so that's like a simple little detour that we could take to programmatically get whatever the player is looking at to see if it has inventory and to see if we should show it here. Move that down like that. All right. So make this looking at FSM on the player really quick. So I'm going to select the player, add component, Playmaker FSM, call it looking at, hit edit, and in here we're just going to do a raycast. And it's going to be forward in the z-axis from our player's camera. And the distance, we'll just say it's, let's say 10. And then the object hit, be a new variable called object hit. And we're going to do a set game object up here at the top just before the raycast to say that we're clearing that every time we're checking. And then we're just going to add a next frame event down here at the bottom, which sends next and then sends back to itself. Okay, so this is just checking every frame what the player is looking at. Should be able to select this chest. I'm going to get out of 2D for a second, focus in on this chest. And instead of having this whole base and lid and the opening animation, just for simplicity's sake right now, what I'm going to do is get rid of this or disable this mesh collider. I'm going to add a box collider to this. So it's just one big box collider that I can edit and make it nice and big like that. So if we hit anywhere on here, that'll be reading as what's in this chest. Okay, and now I can add a FSM on this called Inventory, edit, variables, array, also called Inventory, and this is a game object array. Okay, and we're just going to make sure that the inventory here on our chest is also sized up to 12. Okay, it's very important that you set the size of all of these things, of all of the arrays, to 12. So our external inventory display should be set up. So this is currently set to none, right? If I press play, if I'm looking off over in the distance and I open it, it's still set to nothing. If I come over here and look at it, and I open my inventory, oops, just forgot to get the player. So in this get FSM game object, let's just make sure that we get the player. Now you could do this any number of ways. You could use a game manager, and on initialization you can get the player from the game manager. But I think for simplicity's sake, again, for this is a pretty beefy little tutorial, we're gonna just do a find game object, and it's gonna find something tagged player. It's gonna store it as player. Okay, and I'll just remember to grab my player and tag them as player. As long as there's nothing else in here that's also tagged player, then we'll be fine. But yeah, if you want to, you should check out our tutorials on being able to set things up with game managers, or how to reference scene objects within prefabs, because this is essentially the same thing. A template is like a prefab. Those will teach you other ways to use this. But for now, this will work just fine, as long as there's nothing else in the scene that's tagged as player. Okay, so if I press play, all right, now if we go ahead and select our external inventory display, you'll see that it's set to nothing right now, right? Object with inventory. If I open it up, still set to nothing. But if I'm looking at the chest and I open it, it gets set to chest base. Okay, so now it knows what we're looking at. If I look over here, it's nothing. Okay, so if I grab all these, and then if I grab, say, my stone cube from my inventory and I put it in the second slot of the chest inventory, you can see that our chest inventory now has that in its second slot. So let's just add a transition to kind of keep some of this a little tidy. We're going to name this state remove display. So we're just going to set FSM int and send event. So we'll actually just make a new variable for our inventory display, and we're going to be getting that inventory display from the item slot. So you can do a get FSM game object here at the very top from the item slot currently over. And if we just drag one of these in so we can get these variable names really quick, we'll get the inventory display that it belongs to. Okay, so we're going to change that to item slot currently over and change that to inventory display. Okay, so we're getting the inventory display that the item slot belongs to. Then we're getting and then I'm just going to put this in here so I can get these variable names for free too. So we're going to set the inventory displays. And actually, it's not popping up here, and that's because sometimes when you're using templates, a few of those, you might not be able to get some of the values. So I'm just going to go ahead and change this to our inventory display, right? That's right. And if we go to our actual inventory display, go inside, we can see that it's called item to remove underscore index. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. So copying it and back to our inventory cursor, and I'm going to name it that. Okay, we're setting the value as the item slot index, and then we're sending the event to the inventory display FSM, inventory, let's see, global events, inventory, remove item. Okay, so now we shouldn't get those sort of ghostly remnants of items. Grab these, and if I click this and put it here, close this, open it again, still shows up. Pausing it, I can come over to the item sprite that's buggy, selecting it. If I go to the state that it populates in, we can see that it's still using the sprite, but this actually should be nothing. So when it sets the image sprite, it's using this, and it's using the variable item sprite. So when you grab an item, if we go over here to the grab state, none of these actions are resetting the sprite variable. It's setting the actual component, but we need to reset the sprite variable. So come over here, if I hop inside this prefab, go over to grab, and if we do a set object value, we could put it up here at the top, item sprite, and we're just setting it to none. Okay, so let's see if that fixes our problem. Okay, grabbing these, interact, move that right there, close it, open it again, and that's good to know that it's not there, right? And we can see that this is all maintaining consistency now. Okay, so now we're able to move all of these back and forth. So we should be able to look at our player's inventory, right? Currently has grass and dirt, and there's 3 spaces in between, just like that. And if we select our chest and look at the variables in here, let's make that an output so we can see it. We have a stone, and it's on the 4th spot, and that's right. So all that's matching up. This is all looking pretty good. Okay, so the one thing though is that while we're looking at the chest, that makes sense. But if we're looking away, we should not still see what the chest has, okay? We shouldn't be able to do that. So what we could do is make sure that over here that we do a set game object that sets this object with inventory to null. So we do that first, and then we check if the player is looking at something. And also, we're going to want to come into our item slots. Let's go inside the prefab, and in populate, let's take a cue from the grab state, right, where we set this item sprite object to nothing. I'm going to copy that action, and I'm going to put it over here and populate at the very top. Okay, so it sets the item sprite value to nothing first, and then it grabs the item sprite value from an object and sets itself. That way it just kind of clears anything out from before adding anything new. And if there isn't anything new to add, then it just stays this empty value. And then maybe here in initialize, we could do a set game object. So we could set our item object to nothing. So that's the first thing it does. Okay, that way this get FSM game object doesn't grab a sprite from the last one it had. And we're also going to go over to our item slot. We're going to go inside the prefab. And what we want to do is come over here to UI pointer exit. And we want to have this UI pointer exit tell the cursor it's not currently over anything. So it's kind of like having this UI pointer enter. So I can just copy this set FSM game object, and I could paste it in here in the UI pointer exit state. And this time I'm just going to change it to nothing. So it's setting it as empty. Whenever our cursor exits one of these item slot panels, our cursor will know it's not currently over anything. This will just mitigate some bugs down the line. Okay, so not over anything, and then over item slots. So one of the other things that can happen is if I go ahead and, let me just minimize this canvas, take our chest, and if I duplicate it and scooch it over so there's 2 of them, if I hit play, our system is set up so that when we have an external inventory, it checks if the object is null in the very beginning, right? So over on our canvas, we have our external inventory. And right now it's null. And we know we set this whole thing up where it checks if it's null, and if it is null, then that means that it's an external inventory, and it'll just get the inventory from whatever the player is looking at. But after you do this the first time, this value won't be null anymore. And you can't just clear the value at the top of the FSM, because then that means that even the player display will also get set as an external inventory. Okay, so we can see this happening right now. There's also a couple other things that happen with this setup. So now that I have all those, I can open up this, and yeah, I could put things in here, and that all works fine. But you'll notice that even when I'm looking away from the chest, I still see what was in the chest. And if I come over here to this chest, it shows me what was in that first chest. So the way we could solve that is by coming into our inventory display FSM. And what we want to do is check if the object with inventory is player. And if it's not, then we'll go ahead and clear the object. Okay, so this player inventory, it's not going to just do is null. It's actually going to be a game object compare. Okay, so we're going to put this in, and we're not going to use the is null. Instead, we're checking, is the object with inventory the player? Okay, so we know what the player is. We'll know what the player is because we could just take this find game object, right? Told you about this before. There's multiple ways to find your player. We're just going to use this way because it's easy. I'm going to cut it out of here. I'm going to drag and drop it instead into our player inventory check. Okay, so I'm going to put it up here. So we find the player, and then we check, is our object with inventory the player? And if it's equal, then we can just skip. Okay, and we go down here, and it goes ahead and it just continues doing its thing. But if it's not equal, then we go next. And that fires off over here to turn it into the external game object. So first what it does is it sets our object with inventory to none, and then it gets whatever the player is looking at. And that ensures us that we'll be able to look at multiple inventories throughout the world. So if I save this, and let's go ahead and hit play. Okay, so I'm gonna grab that and that and that, go over to the first chest, open it up, and we're gonna put the stone in there. Okay, and then I'm gonna go over here, look inside this chest, and we can see that there's nothing in here. Okay, I could put my dirt block in here. So there's dirt in that one, stone in that one, dirt in that one, stone in that one. Okay, now still, if we look up, we could still see what was in the last chest that we looked into. Okay, so if I look at this one, and then I look up, it still shows what was in that last one. And you can see here that our object with inventory still says none, so that's right, there is no object with inventory. And when it tries to get inventory, there's nothing to get, they're all null. Okay, but the problem is that when we come over to get the inventory from nothing, see this still says none, we still have the values in our inventory array from the last thing. So all we need to do here, we stop this, go into our inventory, on a init, we can do a array clear. Okay, we'll just put this at the top, and we're going to be clearing our inventory. And this sets all of them to their default value. 0, empty string, false, blah, 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 blah. So we'll still have the size of the array, but all the values will be null now. So if I save this, we press play. Okay, let's grab this and this and this. Okay, we're going to put our stone in here. We're going to look up, and there's nothing. Look down, stone. Look at that, dirt. Dirt, nothing, stone, nothing. And one other little bug that you might want to address, I'll show you, is if you come over and grab the first two items, but then you're looking at this last item and you hit your inventory key, you'll get this error here. And this error happens in the get inventory state. And that's because what it's trying to do is it's trying to get the inventory from that item. We're looking at the item. It's not something that has inventory. So what you need to do is delineate between objects with inventory and without inventory. So this could be done by maybe changing a tag on it. Maybe you could add a tag for items with inventory. You could change which layer things are on. Maybe there's a layer for loot boxes and stuff like that. But I found that a decent way to get this going is by just coming into the inventory display here. And when it checks for this inventory, we're just going to move these down a little bit. Okay, and it's going to come down here to another state right after setting the external. And all it's doing is it's getting whatever the player is looking at. So in here, you could say inventory question mark. You could get FSM bool, and you'll get it of this object with inventory we just got, right? And we'll say that, we'll just assume that it has an inventory FSM. The variable name is inventory. Okay, so we'll copy that and we'll paste it in a new variable. So this bool, if it doesn't have this FSM, there's no bool value that it can return, and so it'll just return false. And that way, when we do a bool test, this is inventory, we could send true or false, and if it's true, that means we can just continue forward. So we'll say next, and we'll go ahead and get the inventory. But if it's false, then we'll say skip. Okay, I'm just gonna move this up here, okay, and it'll go down here to not inventory. Chest base, edit that, and it'll also have a bool variable is inventory set to true. Okay, so I'm just gonna delete this second chest base, duplicate that one because now they both have that bool variable. And if I go ahead and show the external inventory display FSM, when we play this, we'll see that if I grab that, and I try to look at the chest, it goes through all the way down here. It says get an inventory and everything. If I close that and then look at this cube, it lands at not inventory, and it doesn't return this error anymore. Okay, if I look at this, it does. So now we don't get that error. What you could do is you could turn your inventories, like the one I have on my chests, you could turn these into templates. So this inventory FSM isn't something that you have to copy and paste all the time, so you could just come over here and say save template and call this SimpleInventory. Yes, use that in there. So anything can become an inventory. Okay, we'll grab this question mark crate. Okay, and we'll add a component, FSM, and we'll also do the same thing. SimpleInventory. Now when I play this, we'll be able to go in here and treat all these things like they're inventories. Okay, let me just make sure this crate is convex. All right, so I can grab this and this and this, go over to our crate. Okay, put this in here. So now even this question mark crate has stuff in it. Put this in there, come back, grab this, and we'll distribute this around. Okay, so that has the dirt, that has a stone, that has grass. Okay, there's this tiny delay that you get on the update here. It can also be fixed by coming into the external display and maybe changing this weight into a next frame event. This might work. So let's say it's sending off finished. We don't need this weight anymore. I'm just going to turn that off. Let's see how that runs. Okay, grab that and that and that. Open that up, put it in there. Put this in there. There we go. It's a little bit more responsive, right? Doesn't have that little lag, that little delay. It just needed a moment. So that's pretty much how you make a simple inventory system. This base is something that you'll be able to expand on if you wanted to add other features like a maximum stack account. Say if you wanted to put a little number here for how many stacks of grass or dirt or stone you have. The logic for keeping track of how many things there are and how many you can have is something that you can add on top of everything we've built here as a base logic. So if you add any additional features to your inventory system using this as a base, be sure to share in the comments or share in the official Discord. We'd love to see what the community has built upon using these tutorials. And if you see any bugs in this inventory system, let us know in the comments and we'll patch it up. Be sure to check out our other videos to learn all the various features of Playmaker. Links to more learning resources are in the description.